Georgia, Clemson, primetime game, 7:30 kickoff. I've always nailed that this week. In Charlotte, North Carolina, neutral site game. Tigers favored by 3. We will be in the house for this one. Everyone in the country is looking forward to it. Whatever your favorite game is going to be Saturday, it's either this one or this is your number 2, because everyone's looking forward to this to some degree. Week 1 sort of messes with your mind, doesn't it? Think about what happens. A lot of times, you know this game's coming. None of you have thought about the Georgia UAB game next week. Everyone has thought for months about the Georgia Clemson game. The way it messes with your mind is so much happens in what outsiders would deem the offseason leading up to this game. Everything from winter conditioning to spring football to your post-spring summer stuff. A lot of things can happen. Injuries can happen. Remember when George Pickens went down in spring for Georgia? I remember the immediate reaction was they're going to miss him against Clemson. Man, they're not going to be able to beat Clemson, or at least their chances of winning went down significantly. But then you slowly had time and you built that reservoir of confidence back up. And then you get the headline, Eric Gilbert is coming to Georgia, but then he's not going to be available. And that's the current situation with Eric Gilbert. We don't expect him for the time being, at least. And so then, status is a little shaky again, and people who were counting on him to be an impact player, all of a sudden, you're shaken, and so your confidence level drops. Then you start building it, get some good whispers and intel from fall camp. Darnell Washington out 4 to 6 weeks. Tyke Smith out 4 to 6 weeks. Huge impact, both sides of the ball. And then your confidence is just fractured again. But lo and behold, how many of you that said a couple of weeks ago when those injuries happened, Georgia has no shot, let me go dump some money on Clemson. How many of you have built up the confidence again to at least consider picking Georgia to win this game? I know a lot of you have. I have too. Let's dive into the preview. 2 key matchups that I don't think you can overhype enough here, and they overlap. If we look at the Venn diagram and we have A and B, they overlap significantly. The first, which was really, I think, spotlighted today with some comments from Dabo Swinney, is this whole matchup that we've been talking about for months, that interior of this Georgia defensive line, possibly the best in the country, and it is a huge matchup advantage for them against Clemson. Dabo Swinney at his game week press conference today just told you flat out, we're probably going to have to rotate centers in this game. And then on top of that, if that's not bad enough, rotating centers against the small houses that Georgia plays on the interior of the defensive line, Anna Hickey over at Clemson 24/7 kind of chimed in and added, depending on who they start at center, he may have a true freshman starting next to him. It's just not a great matchup. I think it could be a pivotal matchup for Georgia here, and it fundamentally alters gameplay because of the second in this Venn diagram double circle situation. Think about the Clemson wide receiver room, which we have touted all summer long, and the size and the physicality there against this Georgia secondary, minus Tyke Smith. Well, one of the things that you had to really like is you had to really like being able to spread those guys out and being able to work the whole field. Question is, can you do it? Can you do it? How many times in this game is that Clemson passing attack truly going to be able to work the whole field versus having a collapsed pocket in front of you and having to use half field reads, quarter field reads, and having to use some progression and different level concepts? Because what that does all of a sudden is it shrinks the field, and it also takes away some of that timing and rhythm, obviously, that a lot of people are going to depend on. But I look at it and I think to myself, you would think that the biggest key, especially when you're facing size like this at wide receiver, you would think, well, you got to be able to fight on those 50-50 balls. And yes, there will be several instances that Georgia defensive backs have to do just that Saturday night. But I will tell you, and I don't think it's a great mystery, Travis Etienne or not, the first thing Clemson will try and do, the first thing that offensive staff will try and do is they'll try and test the physicality of Georgia on the perimeter, and they'll take a lot of those big-bodied receivers along with the tailbacks that they have, Will Shipley included, even though he's not starting, and they'll execute perimeter run after perimeter run, and they will execute sweeps and screens, and they'll try and get matchups out there that they can't get between the tackles. And if Georgia does not possess the ability to shed those kind of blocks from those big-bodied receivers and make tackles, then it's a long night for them. So those are 2 factors there that I think will heavily influence the outcome of this game. But I also have a couple other ones just to think about here as we kind of transition into prediction time. Because a couple of things that concern me a little bit more about Georgia is this Clemson staff. I was talking to someone over the summer. I had a little birdie just land on my shoulder, and he said, hey, You want to know what this Clemson staff's been doing to get ready for Georgia? Sure, Bertie, I'd love to know. Where'd you come from, by the way? They've been watching that Mississippi State game tape. You may think, what's Mississippi State have to do with this? Well, that's the team that last year went into Athens with under 50 scholarship players and held the University of Georgia with James Cook on the field, with JT Daniels starting at quarterback, with Zamir White playing, with Kenny McIntosh playing, to 23 carries for 8 yards, not 80, 8 combined yards. That's good for 0.3 per pop. Obviously, the Clemson Brain Trust looks and says, if we can do half of that, if we can do fractions of that, then we win this comfortably. Now, it's not an apples-to-apples comparison. For instance, there are different dynamics in play. You got different personnel on the field. But from a pure 50,000-foot schematically speaking standpoint, yeah, I think that's right, Clemson looks at it, and you can understand their confidence in saying, largely we're dealing with the same staff, same players here. If they did it, we can do it. Second thing, okay, so if that's a factor. Second thing is missing Darnell Washington, that tight end for Georgia. Yeah, it's big on third down. I mean, he was going to make a couple of plays or at least have an opportunity to in the passing game. But, man, he is such a valuable asset in the run game. Adding a gap over there, and he's huge himself. That is a guy, I remember Rusty Manziel, when he first got hurt, we were talking, he said, 20 years ago, he's a left tackle. That's the size they used to be not all that long ago. And he's right. And so it's very, very valuable to have a guy like that. Well, you don't. So how much do you miss him? How much do you miss him on 3rd and 5? How much do you miss him on 1st and 10 for that matter? So the other night, you're watching the show, and I got probably, if I got one of you, I got 500 of you ask me, well, I see your predictions. You got Clemson winning the national championship. That has to mean that you have Clemson winning in week 1, right? So let's talk about it. Jesse, let's go ahead and let's take a look at what our model thinks. So every game that we preview on this show, we have the Vegas number, which you see right here. Our current Caesars line is Clemson -3. And then we have the late kick number, our own proprietary model. We run it through 1,000 times, and whatever the aggregate simulation provides us, that's what the late kick line is. Our model sees it pretty much dead on the money, Clemson -2.5. And so think this out loud with me. We've got Clemson winning the national championship. We got our own model, which I trust implicitly, picking Clemson to win. We got odds makers on the side of Clemson. And about 2 hours ago, I just totally had a shift of heart. So I'm going to stick with Clemson to win the national championship. I think Georgia's going to beat them Saturday night. I think that situation along the inside of that Clemson offensive line is going to have a disproportionate impact on this game. There's several matchups to love. If you're a Clemson Tiger fan, several of them. When I say disproportionate, I mean that one's going to matter more than any of them. So I'm going to take Georgia plus the 3 points. I'm going to take Georgia to win outright. And I have gone back and forth with our Steve Wiltfong this week, for example, about which team needs this more. It's been one of the most popular topics on a lot of talk radio over the summer. And I'm not so sure he wasn't right. He kind of changed my opinion on it. I was of the opinion Clemson needs it because they have less fat on their schedule to chew on post-Georgia game. But there's this other factor in play. And that factor is Georgia has been selling cotton candy for a long time on the recruiting trail. And it works. Everyone loves cotton candy. But you can't survive on it. Eventually, you got to have some meat to provide. And in this context, that meat is a big win over a highly ranked team. And Georgia doesn't get enough of them. And they need it. They don't have to have it to survive. It would greatly benefit them to get this. And there are some people in the recruiting industry, for example, that believe that they need it at Georgia even more than Clemson needs it. So fascinating couple of dynamics because I could make the argument on the other side, but, man, Wilfong had me there. I said, you know what, Uncle Steve, that's a good point. So we're going to take Georgia to cover. We're going to take Georgia to win, and I'll be there either way. Really looking forward to that game.